Michigan beats Washington in the national championship game last night. Michigan is a national champion. If you're 25 years old, you have not known a world in which Michigan is a national powerhouse. You've known Michigan as a national brand. You've known Michigan as a historic program. You've known your dad and your grandpa to tell you stories about once upon a time, but you yourself have not known Michigan as a team that was any threat to have this happen, to have blue and maize confetti rain down all over them. Well, it happened. I witnessed, I picked some of it up for myself. It happened last night at NRG Stadium across the street from the Astrodome in Houston, Texas. 34-13 was the final. That's not the padlock stat. The padlock stat, very simple. Don't overthink the room. 303-46. Those were the respective rushing statistics in this game. For that matter, Blake Corum ripped off one that was 59 yards to close the first quarter. That run was more than Washington totaled the entire game. You tell me that, I'm pretty well on my way to being able to pick the winner here. Michigan did favors for everybody last night. I was on the flight home this morning, and I was watching a little bit of the replay of the game, and I thought to myself, man, so many people must have been beside themselves watching this. Not just Ohio State folks, but not just Penn State folks, not just Michigan State folks, but there were a lot of folks who were rubbed the wrong way by Michigan this year. Michigan people relished in that. That's what made last night all the more sweet, because you pushed all your chips to the middle of the table, and it paid off. I don't care what they do down the road. They may do nothing. They may swing the sledgehammer as much as they possibly can. They're not taking that memory away from you. That's not the way it works. It doesn't matter if you take a banner down. That's not the way it works in the real world. So anyway, independent of that, I was thinking to myself, is it possible that even for the biggest Michigan haters in the room, a giant favor was done last night? I think Michigan did a lot of folks a lot more favors than you realize last night. They did me the favor of getting me off the proverbial schneid. I'm no longer winless when it comes to predicting their games. So it was a really big night for me. It was a me and Michigan against everybody kind of mentality last night. But have we forgotten it was Michigan that eliminated the SEC? It was Michigan that ensured we were not going to have an SEC team in the final. Now, that's not necessarily great news for me, because we make more money here when the SEC is in the national championship game. However, a lot of you have what I am told is called SEC fatigue. Well, Michigan was the team that put a stop to it. Michigan was the one that punched out Alabama a week ago out in Pasadena. You know what they also did? Michigan also reminded you the zag still pays off next to the zig. A lot of things had started to happen in the sport about past 10 years or so. You had started to be told the old ways of doing things, big, physical along the lines of scrimmage, pound the rock, play action pass here or there. Those things don't work anymore. This is the modern age of college football. Everyone's zigging. And then Jim Harbaugh tried for a minute, but then he said, well, if I'm going down zagging. And more on that in a little while. But they zagged their way to a national championship last night. Also, in a world where you were told you have to be an elite recruiting power these days to win a national championship, Michigan's not that. They're really good at recruiting. Nothing more, nothing less. Development, superb. Culture, superb competitively. You can argue about the other stuff all you want to. Last 5 recruiting classes, 8, 10, 13, 9, 17. There's no top 5 class there. They've portaled some guys in here or there, but they're not an elite portaling entity either. They are pretty good at getting talent. They're really good at developing it, and this is the result. My point there is you were sold a bill of goods for a little while that the formula to win a championship was something that about 3 to 5 programs in America were capable of pulling off. That was a lie. It was always a lie. Michigan just dispelled it, and if they didn't last night, Washington would have even more thoroughly dispelled it. And if you don't buy into any of the rest of that, they provided pretty tremendous theater this year. Nobody was indifferent on Michigan. No one tuned into the game last night, unless you're just an agnostic fan and you don't know anything about anything. No one tuned in last night and said, I don't really care. Michigan, I could take them, could leave them, don't really care. I happen to believe that's not the worst thing in the world. So I think Michigan did a lot of people a lot of favors. But I want to drill down a little bit. And I was around them for the Penn State game, the Ohio State game, the semifinal, and last night. So I saw 4 Michigan games this year. but I remember going all the way back to the Penn State game. That was the week it all started to break loose. That was the week Harbaugh got suspended again, and he is waiting for a court injunction. There's the theater, by the way. It's the kind of stuff that would normally be reserved for a Netflix series about college football, except it was real life. Do you remember this? You remember they're going to play Penn State. Everybody's mad at Penn State because it's a noon kickoff. Everyone's mad at Michigan because we don't know if we're going to have our head coach. I'm just sitting there, bask. And he didn't get the injunction, and what did Michigan do? They went and just sledgehammered Penn State anyway. They had their head coach with his hands forcibly removed from the wheel, and the bus just kept right on moving. Why? Because it's a player-led team. That's been the vibe around them all year. It was like that even that afternoon. It's the first time I kind of got the realization that this may not matter nearly as much. Quite the opposite. It may fuel them more so than it is working to their detriment, and that remained true all the way down the stretch. Think about how big a credit that is. Think about how satisfying it must be as a head coach, that entire coaching staff, to know you have cast a vision, you've built and cultivated a culture where guys are immersed in it so thoroughly, and it's so effective that in the end, it doesn't even matter if you're there or not. You've done it so well that guys, because they've been a part of it, just it's you take your hands off the wheel, it just operates, it just keeps going. Player-led teams are the teams that normally win championships. Player-led locker rooms are normally the ones with the greatest level of collective accountability. They take the most pride in their performance. If you've got half-decent talent in the room and then that mentality exists, that's when you can do special things. Also, if you don't have that, it's how you can have a whole lot of talented folks and you go 9-3 and you're left at the end of the year saying, oh, how did this happen? And then 5 years down the road, you're watching NFL on Sundays and you're saying, wait a second, we had how many first-round draft picks? How many total NFL draft picks? And we lost how many games? Culture. That's what it's about. So last night, I thought it was another bit of validation for that, probably the supreme bit of validation for that for Jim Harbaugh. I know a lot of people have a lot to say about how tainted the season is. I hear you. It's a solo show. I'm in this room alone, but I know my audience very well. I hear you guys. I read my DMs. I'm looking at my phone light up. Even as we speak, I'm looking at some of you call me out for this. I'll address it in a second. Not that we haven't already spoken about it. I'll address it in a second. Not to your liking, but I'll address it. But meanwhile, last night, game ends, confetti's still raining down, team celebrating. Me and Cannell are there doing postgame for CBS Sports HQ. And what's happening is the Big Ten Network has a set off to the side, and we're there, and I think ESPN had a set down there. SportsCenter may have been emanating from there. I don't know. I mean, it's the national championship game, so like everyone's there. So players are kind of bleeding in and out of the locker room. So J.J. McCarthy, unbeknownst to me, was lurking just off to my right, camera left. And if you've watched my show, if you've watched Late Kick for any length of time, when I talk about Michigan, occasionally I'll revisit a moment 2 years ago where they went and they got body bagged by Georgia in the Orange Bowl in the semifinal game. First time they made the playoff. And I told you a bunch of those freshmen at the time, J.J. McCarthy being one of them, just kind of hung out just outside the tunnel, and they stood there, didn't say a word, weren't really looking to draw attention to themselves. They went off in the corner, but they watched Georgia. And it stood out to me not because players stayed outside to watch celebration. We see that both college and pro all the time. But it was the collection of younger guys. It was that recruiting class that had just come in that were kind of together, not like a clique, but they kind of coalesced and they kind of hung out together, and they were soaking it all in. And every time I've talked about Michigan this year, led by that same group of guys, I've thought about it. So McCarthy walks into our shot last night, and that's exactly what popped in mind. Colin, play what happened last night.
A couple of years ago, you guys go play Georgia. Yeah. And I remember, we're standing over here, and I'm right behind you, and you're watching the red and black confetti rain down. Yeah. And it was a blowout loss. 2 years later, you're in a blowout win. That board says Michigan National Championship. What changed between then and now?
I think those failures brought us to where we are now. We felt like we had to change and we had to keep tightening things down because of those games. And, I feel like we've done a great job this offseason. It was a team effort, took everybody, and, we're here now, so I guess it worked.
Okay, so I think there are some people who just listened to that and said, he didn't say much of anything. I think he said a ton. It's why I'm always careful, especially with younger players. I'm always careful when they fail at doing something, or a young team fails at doing something, or a young coach fails at doing something, and people think the book's written on them. People think this means he can't do this. They can't do that. It just means they didn't. It just means he didn't. If they had lost a game in the regular season this year, it doesn't mean they can't win a title. It means they weren't good enough that day. Funny thing happens. If you've got some ability and some wherewithal and some grind and discipline about yourself, you can improve yourself. Things can improve. The same group of people that failed at doing something one time around, if they get another opportunity, second or third time, they can succeed. So the book was never written on that team. And I thought that to me is what will stick out about Michigan. Now, I ask a lot of other people, or people volunteer their opinion about what the legacy of this team will be. And you go J.J. McCarthy. There's this toxic nature. It mainly exists on the internet, admittedly, but there's this toxic nature some have to want to nitpick the morning after. Well, yeah, McCarthy is the quarterback of the national championship team, but he was only 10 of 18. He only threw for 140 yards. He's the quarterback of the national champion, is what I heard you say. The rest of it was Charlie Brown teacher stuff. It was just wah, 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 wah. I think there's a ton of beauty in the simplicity of just having your guys do what it takes to win. That day at Penn State, he threw the ball 8 times, wasn't it, Jesse? He didn't even throw the ball 10 times. What did they do? What it took to win. How ignorant would you have to be to run it for like half a mile per carry in the first quarter and say, you know what we need to do? Air it out. Why? Well, it won't necessarily put us in better position to win, but it will make the stat sheet look more impressive. That's how you end up in the stands. That's how Sharon Moore ends up having to pay for a ticket to watch the game. Now, I know even some Michigan fans don't exactly think last night was the best called game of his career. I don't ever delve into that stuff, but I'm saying it's not an indictment on him. It's a credit to him. Then they talk about the Jim Harbaugh legacy. What will Harbaugh's legacy be? To me, it's the legacy of a guy that totally pulled a program out of a ditch, but it didn't go like this, okay? It wasn't linear. The path from Jim Harbaugh's first day to today, it's not this steady little cartoon character climbing a mountain and every year's better than the last. They wanted him out of there a few years ago. The 2020 season was horrible. Half the country thinks he ducked Ohio State during the COVID year. And then they reworked the contract, and Jim Harbaugh had a sort of a come to Jesus meeting in his own mind, and who in the world knows what goes on there half the time. But he realized, I'm on thin ice with hot blades here. This is my dream job. I am a Michigan man. Whomst amongst us wouldn't want to be at the moment, but I'm a Michigan man. If I'm going to go down, if I'm going to sink as the Michigan head coach, I'm going to do it my way. And he did not radically jolt his program towards an area that he was unfamiliar with. He went back in his comfort zone. Sometimes people would tell you that that is not the wisest course of action. In this case, it was, which also means there's more than one way to skin a cat in college football. And the other thing is, I appreciate it. I respect that, because at the end of the day, if you fail firing your best shot, you still fail, but at least you can lay your head down at night saying, well, I gave it everything I had. Imagine failing, trying to pose as someone you're not. That's the one that keeps you up at night. The Michigan 2023 team. What's the legacy there? Now, this is the one that I get, probably the biggest variety in responses from, because a Michigan fan will tell you, screw it, don't care, won the title, don't care. Saw the confetti rain down, got my ticket stub, got the game DVR'd, I can pull it up on YouTube. NCAA can't take down a YouTube link. NCAA can't hack into my DVR. NCAA can't take away my memories. NCAA can't hack away at how much fun I just had. In October and November, the NCAA won't be able to wipe my mind clean of remembering when we beat Ohio State, not for the first time or second time, but third time in a row, and going to Pasadena and remembering what we did in overtime against Alabama, and then going to a national championship against this prolific offense and holding them to what? One explosive pass? It doesn't matter what you guys do down the road to us. We remember what happened. One of the most foolish things in the history of sporting existence in this country is An organization trying to retroactively tell you something didn't happen. Doesn't matter. So that's the mentality of a Michigan fan. The mentality of some other fans out there is, well, enjoy it while you can. It'll all be stripped. Maybe it will. You know, the question that I got asked the most, as it turns out, about this team when I was rifling through all this morning is, are you going to address the elephant in the room? Are you going to address how tainted this is? I addressed it plenty this year. I didn't call it tainted. There's a reason for that. If your investigation's ongoing, I'm going to let you conclude it. That's how I'm going to choose to look at this. I spoke my piece earlier this year. I said it's a big deal. I didn't skate around it or dance around it. Half the Michigan folks hated me for it. Just told you how I feel about it. How I feel now is I don't think there's any advantage that you can gain. I don't think you gleaned anything from sign stealing or whatnot that led you to be the most physical team on the field with the University of Alabama last week. You know, so I remember them beating Alabama straight up. That's what I'll remember. I'll remember them beating Washington last night straight up. Now, here's my promise to you. If we have breaking news 3.5 months, 7.5 months, 2.5 years from now, where new evidence comes to light or the NCAA does indeed strip this or that, I'll have a reaction. You know I will. I grew up in Columbus, Georgia. I'm not some Michigan homer. Independent of the color scheme behind me here. It could be an Easter egg, but it's not. Although it is shaped like one and is spinning, it's not an Easter egg. I don't care, but I also don't care to traffic in just this baseless assumption that, oh, it'll all be for naught. I don't think so. I don't think there's any path, regardless of what the NCAA chooses to do, that makes it all for naught, because I witnessed it last night. Two keys here that we talked about in this game ad nauseum leading up to it. Number one, I thought the start for this game was as imperative as the start in any big game we've seen in a long time. Because frankly, I think it's overblown a lot of the time. Everyone says, oh, you've got to start fast. And then lo and behold, you're down 7-0 and you win 35-13. And well, it turns out the start wasn't as important as you said it was. But in this game, it was always going to be important because in an oil and water clash of styles and contrast in styles, there was a really big difference in how it could have started for Washington versus how it did start. And how it did start could not have been any more emphatic in the favor of Michigan. 174-31 yards in the first quarter on the ground. Michigan averaged 19.3 per carry on the ground in the first quarter. And Michael Penix, here's the second thing that we pointed out, had all those explosive plays against Texas. Remember the stat? I don't even have to look at it. I didn't write it down. He was 7 of 11 for, I think, 257 yards against Texas on passes that went 15 or more yards in the air. So he just torched them down the field. Michael Penix had one explosive pass last night. That's it. That's all. And that was it. Those are padlock stats. Here's a double paper pop there. Whom's to thunk it? But yeah, Michael Penix in that offense, greatly limited. There's one more thing I'd like to address. Ton of congratulations for Michigan. Ton of congratulations for Washington, too. But there's one more thing I'd like to address. It's a thing I tell you not to care about, but enough people asked about it that I will address it. It has been pointed out today that slightly less people watched the national title game last night than watched the Rose Bowl between Michigan and Alabama. That's not the biggest shock in the world to me. It is pretty crazy that a semifinal game does a better number than a national title game, but if you understand how powerful branding is in college football, not really. Why do I bring it up? To remind you again, you shouldn't care about it. I don't care about it. You shouldn't care about it. I'm addressing it because people asked about it, but I brought this up the other day on our Sunday night show, and I said, I don't think this game's going to do this big monster number. 25 million people, still a really good number. I didn't think it was going to do some monster number. Candidly, I thought it'd be a smaller number than that. So it actually did a good number by my estimation. But I said, I think it's great for the sport. I think Michigan versus Washington is great for the sport. Now, I knew the pushback was going to be, well, if it doesn't get a monster TV rating, that means it's bad for the sport, right? No. It's not in any sense of the word bad for the sport. Because in the aggregate, think about what Washington did. I told you the favors I thought Michigan did for a lot of college football. But this is great for college football because long term, it taught you so much about what still works. that people lied to you and said wouldn't work anymore. Think about roster building. Neither of these teams are perennial top 5, and only Michigan borders as a top 10 perennial recruiter. Point being, all of a sudden when you realize if that's the bar we have to hit, that's a lot more achievable for a lot more teams. Coaching searches, I think, have been fundamentally altered by what people like Kalen DeBoer have done. Lance Leipold at Kansas is another one that's got people second-guessing and looking around and saying, wait, what are we prioritizing? Why don't we do it like Washington did? Why don't we do it like Kansas did? What did they see from guys that were at these remote outposts that we never even so much as considered? Well, there are a lot of guys out there that are probably going to get opportunities as a result of the run Kalen DeBoer just went on. And think about the hope. The hope that you were told and I was told would only come in an expanded playoff. We're not relitigating it, I promise. I think this gave more hope than the expanded playoff ever will. The expanded playoff is going to be a mirage of hope for a lot of you. This right here is authentic hope because this happened in a 4-team field. They didn't need an expanded playoff. Washington got in the old-fashioned way, and Michigan got in the old-fashioned way. Not by having a top 5 draft pick at quarterback, not by loading up with all-star recruiting classes. They recruited well enough. They built team. And then they had some luck along the way, which every championship team does. But at the core, it was built the same way winners were built in the 1990s and the 1970s and I don't know what they were playing in the 1830s, but the principles of winning were on display. And then whatever you want to say about the off-the-field stuff is whatever you want to say, but I had a lot of fun with this last night. We had a lot of fun. Our crew there had a lot of fun. I only had one bad interaction. And I wish Washington folks all the best. A lot of their players found me on Saturday because we were doing media day. I had, I think, about half a dozen Washington players, more than that, came up to me, had fun. You know, I've been winless with them all year. And to their credit, talked to some of them in the tunnel after the game last night. They came and found me and said, yeah, they got us and you got us. I didn't beat anyone last night. Michigan did. But the one bad interaction I had, I may have had one middle finger from one student wearing sunglasses indoors, typical, and he was hiding behind the extra point net, so no one could get to him, and he knew that. But other than that, great interaction with both fan bases, and it's unique, man. When you have two fan bases who have never been there before, it makes for a very lively atmosphere. And the other thing that stands out, anytime someone wins a title for the first time, is how many tears you see. Georgia folks win, Bama folks win. I would argue if Clemson won another title. No one's crying anymore. I mean, maybe the most emotionally vulnerable amongst us are, but most folks are just celebrating. Oh, Michigan folks were crying left and right last night. I saw teenagers crying. I saw 80-year-old folks crying on the field, in the stands, up the tunnel, every which way. So it was a very, very memorable experience. But yeah, you give up 303 on the ground. That's the most rushing yards in a title game, I think, this millennium. You're probably finishing second best that night. Do you remember this, by the way? Colin reminds me in my ear. P.F. Chang's came through for us. You know, when you're on the fence about something, like Mima always told me, when you're on the fence about a big decision in life, Joshua, just order P.F. Chang's and tell them to double up on the fortune cookies because you may pull something out like we pulled out the other night. I didn't know which way I was going. Michigan, Washington, Michigan. I'm 0 for 7. What do I do? And then Mr. P.F. chimed in, and we opened the fortune cookie. Actually, Bradley did, and I stole this from him. And it said, victory is just around the corner. Hail to the victors after all. So congratulations to Michigan and me on winning the national championship last night. Humbly, of course.